Welcome to Houghton Library. My name is Leslie Morris. I'm the Gore Vidal Curator of Modern Books and Manuscripts, and the Emily Dickinson Collection, in which I'm standing, is part of my department and my responsibility to care for. So I'm often asked the question, why is the Emily Dickinson Collection at Harvard? Most people would think that it would be in Amherst, where Dickinson lived, and where the museum is that was her home. So the story has both a very short version and a very long and complicated version, and I'm going to try to give you something in the middle. So the very short version is that it was a gift to Harvard. The medium version really begins with the poet's niece, Martha Dickinson Bianchi, usually referred to as Madame Bianchi. After Dickinson's death, her poetry was published both by Mabel Todd and Thomas Wentworth Higginson, but many of the manuscripts remained in the family's possession. Martha Dickinson Bianchi, who was the last surviving member of the immediate Dickinson family, continued that tradition of publishing her aunt's poetry and her letters. She, however, had no children, and it became a concern to her about who would carry on the Dickinson legacy after her death. She had become friends with a man named Alfred Leete Hampson. Hampson was actively involved in the Dickinson Centenary exhibit at Yale University in 1930, and he became friends with Madame Bianchi. Over the next 20 years of their friendship, Hampson was really her assistant, and he participated in all of her publications. And she decided that he would be the appropriate person to kind of carry forward the Dickinson torch. Martha Dickinson Bianchi died in 1943, and she left her home, the Evergreens, all of its contents, and of course all of the Dickinson manuscripts and objects to Alfred Hampson. Hampson himself did have ambitions to publish a biography of Emily Dickinson, and he did work on that. But he was himself quite elderly at this point and not in terribly good health. And in the end, in 1948, so 5 years after Martha Bianchi's death, he decided that he needed to find an institutional home for the collection, one that would carry on Bianchi's work and his work, as well as open up the collection to scholarship. And because he was in ill health and suffering from some financial difficulties, he decided that he needed to sell the collection. So at this point, he received help from a man named William McCarthy. Bill McCarthy had also participated in this 1930 Dickinson Centennial exhibition, and so he had credentials as a Dickinson aficionado and fan. And at the time, McCarthy was also working for really the premier antiquarian bookseller in New York, the Rosenbach Company. And so after some discussion about how actually to find an institution that would be able to purchase the Dickinson collection from Hampson, Hampson was convinced to enter into a contract with the Rosenbach Company to find a home for the Dickinson collection. He did stipulate that he needed to be consulted on what that institution would be. So that was in 1949. The first institution that they approached was Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C. Mildred Bliss herself was a collector, had a Dickinson poem in her collection, and they felt that Dumbarton Oaks, with its magnificent gardens, would be an appropriate place for the Dickinson collection. However, Dumbarton Oaks had been given to Harvard 10 years earlier, and they had decided to really focus on Byzantine history and culture, and so they came back and said, "This is a wonderful treasure. We would love for it to be at Harvard, but we're not the right place." you should speak to the Houghton Library in Cambridge. And so they did. The Rosenbach Company approached Bill Jackson, who was then the librarian of Houghton Library, and suggested that the Dickinson collection could be purchased by the library. Now, the price for the collection was $50,000, and that was far in excess of what Jackson had in his acquisitions budget, so he knew he had to find a donor to give the collection to the library. And the first person he thought about was a Harvard graduate named Gilbert Montague, who was class of 1901, had then gone on to Harvard Law School, and was a noted antitrust specialist in New York. So Montague had been a member of the library visiting committee. He'd given a few small gifts to the library to help with acquisitions in the past, but this was a sum that greatly exceeded any of his earlier gifts. Fortunately, however, there was a connection between Montague and Emily Dickinson. He described himself as a collateral cousin, so maybe a cousin 3 or 4 times removed from the poet herself. And he was a collector himself, although he tended to focus on historical materials, not literary materials. His wife, Amy, however, had been a very close friend of Martha Dickinson Bianchi, and they had an extended correspondence over many years. And Hampson knew this, and so Montague seemed to be a person, and Harvard seemed to be an institution that would really carry on Martha Dickinson Bianchi's and his mission of making Dickinson available. And so after much negotiation over the terms of the contract, which Hampson stipulated that there be an Emily Dickinson room, the contract was signed, and the collection was given to the Houghton Library as a 50th reunion gift by Gilbert Montague. 50th reunions at Harvard have always been somewhat competitive, with each class trying to outdo the last. And during his reunion, during commencement of 1951, there was a big exhibition in the Houghton Library exhibition room, and Montague was also given an honorary degree. So from his perspective, it was a great deal. His classmates were made aware of his generosity. The library was incredibly happy because this very important collection was a gift to the library. And Jackson immediately started negotiation with Harvard University Press. There had been no proper scholarly edition of Dickinson's poems and letters, and Jackson's interest in the collection was not just as a trophy, although it certainly was and is one of the iconic collections of the library. But he was also interested in promulgating scholarship on Dickinson and felt that proper scholarly editions of the letters and poems would definitely foster that. And indeed, that is what happened with the press publishing those editions in the 1950s. So that's kind of the basic story of the Dickinson collection. The Dickinson Room is open during our regular Friday tours. Those tours are free and open to the public, 2 o'clock every Friday. Just show up in the Houghton lobby and you can have a tour. All of the Dickinson collection has also been photographed and digitized, and you can look at all of that material and explore the Dickinson collection for yourself on our library's website. You can also explore all of Dickinson's poetry manuscripts at the online Emily Dickinson archive at edickinson.org, where you can see not only the Houghton manuscripts, but those from another dozen institutions holding Dickinson's poetry. So there's lots to explore, and you can always email me or anyone at the library with any questions you might have.